12th of Teves.
Yeah.
Right? And Hanukkah, of course, straddles Kislev and Teves. It starts on the 25th, but it ends up in the last few days of Hanukkah end up inside of Teves. It's not. It's difficult to know how many days because, interestingly enough, the months of Cheshvan and Kislev are the 2 months which can sometimes be 29 days and sometimes be 30 days long, just depending on the year and depending on how many days you need to have inside of the year. So if somebody's born on the 30th of Kislev, for example, so sometimes he has a birthday and sometimes he doesn't. I just thought I would throw that in, but it got no reaction whatsoever. So I think we're just going to carry on.
Well, sometimes he has a birthday.
Oh, thank you. Right, good, yes. Anyway, Teves, the other thing that we've got in Teves, aside from the end of Hanukkah, is Asara B'Teves. Asara B'Teves, the 10th of Teves, is a fast day. It's a fast day which commemorates the laying of the siege around Yerushalayim, which culminated with the destruction of the temple. However, it's not quite as close to each one to the other as it sounds like within the year. We have Asar B'Teves on Tisha B'Av, which is about 6 or 7 months later. We've got the destruction of the temple, but it was really a 2.5 year siege. The siege was put down on Asar B'Teves, and only 2.5 years later was the temple destroyed. Of course, for those of you who are familiar with Jewish history, you'll know that what caused ultimately the destruction of the temple was the inability of the Jews to get on with each other. Baruch Hashem, things are very different today, and all Jewish communities are very respectful of each other and very much, live in harmony one with the other. And, Baruch Hashem, otherwise that might be the cause of another destruction, which would be terrible, right?
I don't know if that's sarcasm.
Oh, perhaps I should say it again then, just to make it a little clearer. I think things have not changed. The destruction of the temple was really caused by the inability of two factions within inside of Yerushalayim to get on with each other. They both claimed that they were right, and they both claimed that only they were right, and there was no possibility of making any kind of a compromise between them. And in the end, ultimately, that's what caused the destruction. Yeah.
What was the machlokes?
Oh, hey, you're getting there. That's good, huh? Well, what was the machlokes? The machlokes was how to deal with the invasion, right? How to deal with the invading armies. The rabbis were of the opinion that the best thing to do was to cooperate with them. The more, they understood that the sovereignty over Israel was pretty much gone, and the thing to do now was to try to hold on to whatever there was. And if that meant cooperating with the invading army, then that's what they needed to do.
Again?
Huh?
Who was invading again?
The Romans.
Right?
It required cooperation. There were a group of people who claimed that the only thing to do was to fight. We have to fight to the death, and it's completely forbidden to come to any kind of an understanding with the invaders. And subsequently, what happened was that, for example, there were huge amounts of grain stored. That the siege at the beginning of the siege wasn't bothering anybody because they had food and they had water, and obviously it was uncomfortable. You couldn't get in and out of the city, but it wasn't the end of the world. But what they did, the people who didn't want to have any kind of interaction whatsoever with the invading Romans, they actually set fire to the grain supplies. It's a whole terrible series of events, one after the other. And again, this inability of the Jewish people to be able to get on with each other is pretty bad, and it's something which keeps repeating itself. Not a lot has changed, since that time.
So they wanted to fight so bad that they set fire to their own supplies.
Yeah, because they wanted to force some kind of reaction. Right, so enough of sitting around and enough of just waiting for things to happen. We've got to be more proactive, and the way to be proactive was to get rid of everything that was making them feel complacent, and then let's go out to war. Yeah.
So if the rabbis had been like, all right, let's fight, or if the fighters had been like, all right, let's give up, then
I tell you, I think it's more than that. I don't, the opinions were completely opposite one from the other, but if they would have just been able to sit down and talk to each other, right? There was this sense of disconnect between them.
Do you think it's still there?
Huh?
Do you think that sense of disconnection is still
Oh,
there?
for sure. Gosh, I mean, it's something that the Jewish people have suffered from, and we suffer from up to and including today. It's terrible.
Well, this wasn't any disagreement or machlokas as far as the level of who was religious or not. Like that's, I would say, the problem today is the secular Jews, the religious Jews. This just seemed to be more of a take a peaceful approach or
maybe. I mean, it's I think the problem over here is that the machlokas itself is what destroys. What the source of the machlokas is, so that changes throughout history. Sometimes it's like this, sometimes it's like that. But ultimately, the argument itself is not. That's not the issue. It's the fact that they couldn't coexist together with each other that caused the destruction. And the fact that we can't coexist with each other today is a source of tremendous concern. I mean, we should all be very concerned about this inability for people to get on with each other.
Do you think that religious Jews should be doing more to try to make peace or coexist with the secular Jews as of right now? Do you think that we could be doing more? I
think we could be doing more, and I think that we are. I think. Look, the thing is like this, right? So they'll tell you, well, let the non-religious Jews make the first move. But I think if that's an argument which has no validity, which means if they're not going to do it, then we have to do it, right? And the more we do it, the greater is our ability just to reach out to other people and show people that we're not, we're not this sort of like terrifying body of homogenous, body that's just going to get out onto the streets and start overtaking everything.
Do you know what's really interesting though? I went through it once. There's a thing in England called Lamud. Have you heard of it?
Yeah.
That it's very interesting to go there because you have all different types of Jews learning the same thing, learn all for the same reason. It's the most amazing thing, and it shows that it can happen. But at the same time, you have people that seem to think that my whole thing is that if our religion is based on don't do to others other than what you would done to yourself, in a sense. If you have to put yourself in the other person's shoes before you judge them where they are religiously.
For sure. Of course, it runs both ways. I don't want to give the wrong impression. I'm not suggesting that the religious communities are at fault and the non-religious communities are not at fault. Right? One of the great Hasidic rabbis says you greet everybody with a smile, including wicked people. Because wicked people, they don't look at themselves as being wicked. So they don't know, they don't understand why you're treating them any differently. So and then they'll get offended, right? How complicated can it be? Just to be nice. I mean, I'm sorry to sound so trite, I really am, but that's the way to get through to people. Is just to be nice to them, and not to preach to them, and not to demand from them as well.
What is the line between preaching and not preaching, kind of thing?
I don't know. It's very difficult to define, I imagine, isn't it? But I think maybe, right? Maybe. Which means if somebody asks you, "What am I supposed to be doing?" So then feel free to tell them. But if that person's not asking you, then who do I have to tell them? So again, if they're doing something which is going to damage them, they're doing something which is dangerous. So obviously you've got an obligation somehow to try and get them to stop doing that. For example, you've got somebody who's addicted to cake, for example. So, I think we would have an obligation to try to help that person.
We're going to help them today.
Right. This here, I mean, Shlomi bringing in cake every morning is just fueling the addiction. And it's
local supplier.
It's just an example. Don't look at me like that. Really, it's not. He can't speak. He's got a mouthful of cake right now.
So that was about. All about that. Jews not getting on together.
Asara b'Tevis, the fast of Tevis, is the beginning of the process which brought about the destruction of the temple, which is absolutely rooted in the idea that we can't get on with each other.
On the other side of the story, you've got to think about Israel in the summer, for example, where it doesn't matter what type of religious Jew you were, or whatever religion you were, there was so much togetherness. For sure.
Yeah, you know what the problem is? The problem is that Israelis and Jews, we only ever manage to draw together when we're in times of terrible sorrow. Right? Whether it is whether it is going to war. A couple of summers ago, Israel was at war, and it was unbelievable what was going on over here. The whole of people from the south, almost 1 million people evacuated their homes because of the bombs and the rockets that were being sent through, and just people all around the country just put them up. There wasn't any thoughts about, I don't know, who do you vote for? Sorry, we don't take in people like that. It's that people opened their homes and brought, allowed people to come and stay in their homes for as long as they needed. There was no sense of judging anybody else. When the people have been murdered, especially the three teenagers that were murdered. When was that? Like it was this summer, no?
Yeah.
This summer. I mean, the sense of unity was something extraordinary, really, really extraordinary. The problem is that for some reason we can't hold on to that when we're not in times of despair. That's the problem. And I'll tell you something else, which is even more, I think this is even worse, as an indictment of the Jewish people. If we can do it in times of sorrow, that means that we can do it, right? I once had a teacher in school that the only classes that I ever did really well in was English.
I thought I was going to say Jewish education.
English literature and English composition. I was great, and I once came to my I got a pretty bad report, and I came to my class teacher and I told him, I said, look, I said, what can I do? I'm obviously not that bright. What do you want from me? And he said, that's not true. He says you should know that you made a technical mistake over here. He says you're brilliant at English. He says if you're brilliant at English, it means that you can succeed in all the other things as well. It's just you're lazy. So I said, well, what was the mistake? He says you should never have done well in English. And then if you flunk everything, you can come and you can say that you're not very bright. What can I say? I can't answer that. He says, but it's not true, and you know that it's not true. It's an indictment, right? If the Jewish people can get on with each other, if we can unify and we can behave in the way that we behave when times are tough, then why can't we do it when times are good? There's a medrash. The medrash says that the Satan, right, the Yetzer Hara, comes to God on Yom Kippur, comes to God and says, Mi ka'amchi Yisrael, there's nobody like your nation. Look at them. Incredible. In shul, davening, fasting, unbelievable. So at face value, the medrash sounds very nice, no? That the Yetzer Hara, the Satan, one day in the year is, that's it, I've been bested. But one of the commentaries on the medrash says that that's not pshat. What is the Yetzer Hara? What is the Satan doing? It's laying the groundwork for the next day, the day after Yom Kippur. The day after Yom Kippur, he's going to come back to God and he's going to say, well, God, I don't know how to tell you this, but, yesterday they were so pious and righteous, and I don't know, today they don't seem to be behaving like that. Why would that be? I think that's a pretty terrifying medrash. I really do. Again, I'm not saying that we should not keep Yom Kippur, and that way that the Satan won't be able to come to God and say, well, what can I do? They behave like this all year round. I've got nothing to say. But rather, we need to behave properly when it's not Yom Kippur as well.
But isn't there also midrash going back again about how there were 3 angels when creation came, and the angel of peace and the angel of war and also like that, about how should man be created?
Yeah.
What was that one?
It says that should man be created? Shouldn't be created. So the angel, the angel, whatever the koach, the power of war comes along and says, no, they're going to go to war against each other. They're going to destroy everything. Yeah. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu doesn't listen, right? Again, HaKadosh Baruch Hu created us. We're here. The Gemara says that maybe in human perspective, maybe it would have been better if human beings hadn't been created. We don't seem to bring very much positive dimensions into the world, myself excluded, obviously. But we don't seem to be doing a very good job. But it's clear that God created us, therefore we're supposed to be here, which means that now that we're here, we need to do the very best job that we can do. Right? Asara b'Teves, we've got these stations in the year, the 10th of Teves, the 17th of Tammuz, and the 9th of Av, which are reminders for us that we are supposed to be doing better than we're doing. That's what it comes down to. Right? You can't ignore the reality. The Jerusalem Talmud says that any generation where the temple is not rebuilt in its time, it's as if they destroyed the temple. Which means we all make the mistake of thinking, you know what, well, those people, 2,000 years ago, what a bunch of bums they were, and it's terrible the way that they behaved, and obviously, if we would have been around, then it would have been different, but it's not true, because the Gemara is saying that if we would be different, then the temple would be rebuilt, right? And if the temple hasn't been rebuilt in our generation, then that means that our generation is no better than they were. Again, it's disturbing. Right? We like to think that we're okay. Anyway, that's Teves. The month of Teves has got, it's interesting that it's got Hanukkah in it. The beginning of Teves has got the end of Hanukkah in it, which is the festival of light and the festival perhaps of clarity. And then it's also got the 10th of Teves in it, which is a fast that is really the fast of darkness and the lack of clarity. And after the month of Teves, we move into the month of Shvat. We're right now in the last day of the month of Shvat. Yeah?
A quick question about the 10th of Teves.
A quick question.
What made it the...
That's not very quick, is it?
What made it the fast day?
What made it a fast day? The rabbis decreed that because this was the beginning of the process that ended with the destruction of the temple, they decreed that it was a day that we have to fast. Right, the same way that on the 17th of Tammuz, because the walls were breached and the hole was made inside of the walls, so at that point the rabbi said we need to fast again for that as well, and ultimately the 9th of Av, which is the destruction of the temple, so then we fast. That's a longer fast. The 10th of Teves is the shortest fast of the year actually, because it's from dawn until nightfall and it's in the winter, and that's about as short as it can get. We can't get any shorter than that unless you're living in Australia. And then it's a rather long fast because it's in the summer. Don't live in Australia. Yeah. Certainly not on the 10th of Teves, anyway. Anyway, Shvat. Let's get to the month of Shvat. The month of Shvat is a quiet month, although it's got Tu B'Shvat inside of it. What is Tu B'Shvat? Tu B'Shvat is the
fruit in it.
Yeah, Tu B'Shvat is the Rosh Hashanah for the trees. It's the new year for the trees. There is a custom to eat lots of different fruits. Some people have a custom to eat 15 different kinds of fruits because Tu B'Shvat is the 15th of Shvat. It's right in the middle of the month when the moon is at its fullest. So some people have the custom to eat 15 different kinds of fruits. Some people have the custom to make what's called a Tu B'Shvat Seder.
That's a weird idea.
Didn't it? Yeah, you have one over here.
Yeah.
It's an interesting thing, and there's again different customs. One custom is to drink 4 cups of wine. Again corresponding to the seder that's made on Pesach, and different. It's got to be different colors of wine. So you start off with white wine, and then you have rosé wine, and then you have red wine. And by the 4th cup of it's just customs. By the 4th cup of wine, it really doesn't matter what color it is, because you're so completely sloshed at that point that it could be anything really.
I can't see colors anymore.
It's not like you speak from experience.
Huh?
You speak from experience.
Actually, my experience with Tu B'Shvat is to eat fruit. I don't make a Tu B'Shvat. It's more of a Hasidic thing. It's based in Kabbalah, and so it's got a more esoteric dimension to it. It's certainly not a custom that I was brought up with. When I was growing up, we had Jaffa oranges. That was Tu B'Shvat. Over here in Israel, you'll see a lot of different fruits on the market. Lots of people have the custom to eat dried fruits because it's the winter. There isn't, bless you, because it's the winter. There isn't a great selection of fruits available. What's kind of ridiculous is that the dried fruits mostly come from Turkey. So I don't know what, we're commemorating Rosh Hashanah for the trees over here in Eretz Yisrael by eating dried Turkish fruit. I'm sure there's some logic there somewhere. It escapes me. There is a custom for some people. They like to make a shechianu on Tu B'Shvat by taking a fruit that they haven't eaten yet and eating it for the first time and making the bracha Borei Pri Ha'etz and making the bracha shechianu. And there is a custom to pray, interestingly enough, that you have a nice esrog for Sukkot on Tu B'Shvat. Because again, what is Tu B'Shvat? Tu B'Shvat is really, we're talking about the beginning of the process that's going to bring the fruits out. We're in the middle of it's the middle of the winter. We've just got past the middle of the winter, and we're talking about Tu B'Shvat is really the concept of rejuvenation, which means even though we don't see very much happening, we know that underneath the ground, everything is beginning to move. The trees are beginning to get their nutrients and get the sap that they need in order to allow themselves to grow nice and big and strong.
On Tu B'Shvat, like for example, or at a wedding, for example, you'll always think about. There's an understanding to that. At times of happiness, you have to also remember the sadness of the destruction of the base made.
Yeah.
So why is there no tachnon?
Why is there
no tachnon?
when?
On a happy day, on a day like Tu B'Shvat, why do you have tachnon? Because tachnon surely reminds us of the temple.
Yeah.
And stuff like that.
So I think the pshat's like this. The Gemara explains that when you go to a wedding, right? So there's a custom. You've all been to a wedding, right? There's a custom to break a glass under the chuppah. There's actually a custom which you may not be familiar with. You may not have seen it, which is to put a little bit of ash on the head of the chatan, of the groom, before he goes to the chuppah. Again, these are things that are being done as a reminder of the destruction of the temple. Breaking the glass under the chuppah is something which everybody knows about. The reason that I was given is because it's the last time that the chassan will put his foot down, because after that he'll be married and he won't have anything to say. I'm not sure if that's actually written by the sages anywhere, but it's certainly a sage piece of advice, that's for sure. The idea is, what's the idea? The Gemara says that because when a couple get married, it's conceivable that the joy, the happiness, will get a little bit out of hand, right? So if you've been to very lively weddings, you'll know that all kinds of ridiculous things happen over there. So the idea of breaking the glass under the chuppah and the little bit of ash on the chassan's head is simply to remind us to keep things in perspective. Now, when we've got Yom Tov days, we don't need that, because the Yom Tov days are supposed to be being kept according to the halacha, which means we're doing what HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants us to do, and we don't have to recite Tachnun, because there's no concern that the simcha will spiral out of control.
You just said that.
However, interestingly enough, on Chol HaMoed Sukkos, which is the time that in the temple there was a Simchas Beis HaShoeva, and they used to have the most incredible dancing and music and lights and all kinds of rabbis were doing all kinds of incredible shows over there. They decided that there was a little bit of a problem with things getting out of hand, intermingling between men and women, and they separated things in a different way than they normally had up until then. The Gemara explains, Gemara in Sukkah describes what they did, which means that I guess we do have to be a little bit wary, but because what we're doing on Yom Tov is being given to us by God, so it's okay not to say Tachnun, and it's okay not to have a reminder of the destruction of the temple. Yeah.
What's the Hasidic thing where the woman has a string coming from her dress or something, and the guy's dancing around?
Yeah, there's something called a mitzvah dance. I do not know what the origins are, but I'll tell you that here, if you really want to know, I'm a big expert on mitzvah dances, right? Why is that? Because I come from a completely non-Hasidic background, and have never had any exposure to mitzvah dances at all until one of my daughters got married, and her husband came from a Hasidic background, and they wanted to have a mitzvah dance at the end of the wedding. So, whatever, they're pretty long, and somebody gets up. Again, if they're done properly, they can be very inspiring. Right, which means that somebody gets up and sings, verses that they've written especially for the wedding about the various people. So they'll call up the grandfathers to come and dance with the color, right? And they'll call up various different family members to come and dance with the color. But because you're not supposed to touch someone who's a woman, you're not supposed to touch a woman who's not your wife or your daughter or your granddaughter. So for the people that aren't directly related, there's a sometimes they use what's called a gartel, which is a that black belt that the Hasidim wear when they daven. Sometimes you've got something a little bit more elaborate that's been made especially for this, and the kala holds one end, and the person who's dancing with her holds the other end.
So he says the verses.
No, they normally bring in somebody to do it. It's like a very specified, it's like a real specialist niche. What happened by my daughter was that all different kinds of people got called up to dance with her. The various verses, it's like a sort of like a poem. Were some of them were very nice. Some of it was very, very nice. Like before I got called up to dance with my daughter. So they talked about my parents, and they talked about my father-in-law, and people that aren't there, they were passed away. It can, like I said, it can be a very uplifting experience. It really can.
Can it not sometimes?
Yeah, sure. I mean, it can turn into a circus. That's for sure. It's like some kind of weird thing that's going on over there. It's not something that I'm particularly enthusiastic about. By the Hasidim, when the family of the Rebbe gets married, the highlight of the wedding is when the Rebbe dances with the Kala. And this will happen sort of like at 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning after everyone's been at this wedding the whole time, and this is mamish the highlight. If you speak to the Hasidim, they'll tell you that this is the moment when the heavens are open, and all kinds of incredible potential is there waiting, for the chassan and the kala and for the people who are watching and whatever. I mean, look up and see if the heavens are open. I don't know. That's like. Anyway, so Tu B'Shvat, it's an interesting time. Tu B'Shvat is really the concept of potential, which means that we're past the middle of the winter. We're now talking about the beginning of the rejuvenation process, but we don't see it. The only thing that you will see, which are very, very pretty, are the almond trees are beginning to blossom. That's normally the sign that Tu B'Shvat is almost upon us, when you start seeing in the middle of, all these sort of trees that are looking rather bare and sorry for themselves. All of a sudden you'll see this very beautiful blossom. It's pink, and it's very, very sort of like delicate, and it's very beautiful. And that's the almond blossom. The almond tree is the first tree to blossom. It's the first tree to produce its fruit. It produces fruit very quickly, actually. Almonds grow very quickly.
Where I live, it's usually cherry blossoms.
Sorry?
Where I live, it's usually cherry blossoms.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Wait, where's that?
Washington State.
In Washington State. Do they not have almonds down there?
They probably do, but you don't see them. They're on farms or something.
So it would be interesting to know actually which blossoms first.
Yeah.
Here in Israel, there's no doubt whatsoever. You can't miss it, because everything else is still bare, and you've got these beautiful pink blossoms everywhere. And that's the month of Shvat, Tu B'Shvat in the middle. This is the last days of Shvat coming to an end tonight. In Mitzvah Hashem is going to be Rosh Chodesh Adar. Rosh Chodesh Adar, it says the Gemara like this: Misha nichnas Adar marbim besimcha. That when the month of Adar comes along, you need to be more joyful. Which might mean over here to put in a request that we should have 2 cakes instead of 1, right? Just to, so that everyone else can have some as well, and not just Ben. But that might make other people happy. I don't know. Adar is the last month of the year, right? If you remember when we spoke about this at the beginning, we started talking about this. We spoke about the idea that the year of the months begins with Nisan. So we're now coming to the last month of the year. It's the 12th month of the year, and it's Adar. And inside of Adar, of course, we have Purim. We'll talk about Purim in a moment, but let's just talk about that little piece of Gemara over there. Misha nichnas Adar marbim besimcha. It says, the Gemara actually says, Misha nichnas Av, that when the month of Av comes upon us, which is the month that the temple was destroyed, mimatim besimcha, we're supposed to be less joyful, and in Adar we're supposed to be more joyful.
In a sense, how can somebody tell you how to react to something?
Yeah, interesting, right? How are we being told to have an emotion, right? Yeah.
Why is it that in the month of Adar we're supposed to be more joyful? I mean, I know that Purim happened and all, but during Purim, even we were in exile. So.
It's true, but I think the idea of it being not just permissible to get drunk, but a mitzvah to get drunk, is definitely something that makes most people happy.
If one doesn't drink, what can they do?
You could eat cake saturated in alcohol.
Really, what can they do?
If you don't drink at all.
No, if they don't drink that much.
We'll get to it. Mitzvah Hashem, we'll talk about it.
The mitzvah is that you just drink more than what you usually do.
We'll talk about it. There's another detail over there as well that needs to be taken care of, but we'll get there. We'll get there. Adar. So the month of Adar is a very joyful month. How can you be told to have an emotion? How can you be told to be happier? Yeah.
Well, I feel like what I've learned, like a lot of things in the Torah, they're trying to get you to do something that's like the opposite of your initial reaction. So they say honor the mother because your initial reaction is to honor the, things like that. Like whatever you're gonna naturally do, they try to kind of give you advice to do the other thing. So maybe your initial reaction is be sad with what was going on, so they're saying be happy.
It's interesting. You know what? Maybe it's interesting because one of the dimensions of Purim is something called v'na'afochu, which is to turn things around, right? To make things the opposite of what they seem. That's interesting.
On the nose, Bernie.
It's interesting.
Spot on the nose.
Another question I had was: is Adar related to the word Adam? Are those the same root words?
I don't think so actually, because the word the two-letter root of Adam is dam, which is blood, right? And again, the idea of a person being a physical being and having blood. I imagine that the root of the word Adar, the two-letter root of the word Adar, is dar, which means to live. So actually, you know what? Maybe there is dar, not to live, not to live as an exist, but rather to live in a place.
Like Hadar is room, right?
Huh?
Hadar is room.
Cheder is a room, right? Yeah. So the same two-letter root of dar. In Aramaic, you wouldn't. In Hebrew, you say ani gar po, I live here. In Aramaic, you would say ani dar po, I live here, right?
Man, land, and live do seem pretty.
Yeah,
related.
no, for sure. I think. Listen, I don't think it's that complicated to make some kind of a connection. I'm just not convinced that they're rooted exactly in the same idea. Rav Hirsch, who is one of the greatest experts who ever lived in the etymology of words and the Torah and understanding words in different ways, I'm sure can make an easy connection between all three of them. But yeah, Adam, Adama, that's for sure. There's no doubt about that one at all.
Never part of the root, right? Or if it's Aleph at the beginning, it's not normally not. I think
not. I think not. Yeah, I had to ask my daughters are experts in Hebrew grammar. I'm an expert at not being an expert in Hebrew grammar. That's my expertise. That's what I do the best. So the month of Adar, interestingly enough, the zodiac sign of the month is Pisces, fish. And there's a very interesting concept over here. You know that the fish, the bracha of fish is that they live under the water, they reproduce great numbers, but you don't really see them because they're covered. They're covered up by the water. And the idea that we, the Jewish people, we're supposed to live our lives in a quieter fashion, and not to draw attention to ourselves, especially when we're in exile. Maybe that's part of the idea, Ben, of Adar being that we're still in exile. The story of Purim, we're in exile, but this idea of not drawing attention to ourselves. There are all different kinds of interesting ideas written by very early authorities decrying the ostentatious buildings and homes that Jews are putting up in different countries that they live in. It's just an interesting idea. Not to draw attention to yourself, even if you have it. Some of it is learned from Yaakov Avinu. Interesting enough, by Jacob, it says that when there was a famine in the land, and the first time that he sent the brothers down to Egypt, he told them to go not because they needed necessarily food at that point, but rather not to draw the other people's attention to the fact that they had food. Right, if everybody's going down to Egypt to get food, so you should really go down to Egypt as well and get food, even though we don't read it right now, but we don't want to draw attention onto ourselves in that way. That's an interesting idea. The idea of living lives which are more, I guess, more modest. Right? Again, inside of your home, you can have whatever you want and do whatever you want, but just that what you project to the outside should be something a little bit more low key. Well, I can see that idea wasn't very enthusiastically embraced over here, so perhaps we'll just leave that. I'm sorry for trying to turn you into more modest and humble people. I apologize. I really apologize. I really do.
I'm very interested in this. March 1st is my birthday. So
oh yeah, when?
March 1st.
March 1st. Wait, that's soon, isn't it?
Yeah.
In a few weeks.
How old are you gonna be?
25.
25. Wow.
Is there significance to the Rosh Chodesh of March 1st? That's what it means, right? First day.
Well, I mean, of course, you were born.
Oh, okay.
Bernie.
I think it's bad they put my birthday so close to Purim. I think that's like,
No, not at all. Are you kidding? It's like it's just going to enhance. It's going to enhance everybody's joy.
There's no stopping.
Is that why it's like you don't see a lot of religious people wearing colors?
What?
You don't see a lot of. I tell you, maybe it's got something to do with it. Black and white is just they're considered to be quieter. Non-eye drawing
Gray
colours.
Would be more even.
Grey. I mean, all of these sort of like more somber colours, dark blue, grey. What you see around in the more religious world. It is true that the Shulchan Aruch says that women should avoid wearing colours which draw people's attention, particularly red. Red is considered to be the brightest colour of all. Not brightest, but the most noticeable colour of all. And so the Shulchan Aruch says that women should avoid wearing red clothing because that's now drawing people's attention towards them, and the idea of being a little bit more, let's try not to be quite so obvious, right? Maybe that's why we don't see people wandering around in yellow suits and pink hats, and except on Purim. You can wear a pink hat on Purim if you want. Hey, it's my pleasure. I'm happy to do my best to help you fulfill your dreams.
You've been waiting to wear that hat.
Anyway, the build up to Adar, of course, the build up to Purim, the whole month is really certainly the beginning of the month is all taken up with preparation. There's a lot of anticipation for Purim. The kids, of course, go nuts. They love it. There's a just the idea of a little bit. Everything's relaxed a little bit, right? People get dressed up on Purim. The idea of drinking, the idea of things being it's a very different day.
Do you dress up?
Huh?
Do you dress up? Like dress up like costume dress up.
I might, put on a tie that's slightly brighter than this, possibly. Do I get not necessarily? I mean, normally what happens is at some point during Purim, I think I told you once. Purim for me is really not a big deal because I don't normally drink. So I don't drink very much, and then I'm like not really overly aware of what's going on anymore, and a little bit like you people. At some point, I see photos, after Purim, and I'm like wearing the most bizarre things, like saucepans on my head, or ladies' hats or something, or some ridiculous tie. I don't know how it got there. I don't know who did it. I've got no idea, but it looks like I was having a good time. Whether that's true or not, I don't know because I really don't remember very much about this stuff. What was I was going to tell you something, and you completely diverted me over here to something about the build up for Purim. It's interesting. The way that the rabbis describe Purim and the commentaries, the Maharal talks about this at great length, but Yom Kippur is the day that's dedicated to God, and Purim is the day that's dedicated to us. Yom Kippur and Purim are days which sort of balance. I'll show you that they're days which balance each other out. Which is on Yom Kippur, we don't really do anything physical at all. So we don't eat and we don't drink and we go to shul and we spend all day davening and.
Focus on ourselves.
Huh?
We focus on ourselves.
We focus on our relationship with God. Really, that's really the ultimate dimension. It's as if the way that the Maharal describes it, it's fascinating. It's as if Yom Kippur is half a day, and Purim is the other half a day, and together they make a whole. And the way that he describes it is, it's chetzi la Hashem, half is for God, the chetzi lachem, and half is for you. Which means Yom Kippur is for God and Purim is for us. So in the same way that Yom Kippur is a completely spiritual dimension, it's a completely spiritual day, Purim is really a physical day. So we've got a mitzvah on Purim. Again, obviously we have to daven and we have to read the Megillah, but aside from that, we've got the mitzvahs of Purim are very physical. Right, so we've got to give out charity, and we've got to give out gifts of food to our friends if you have any, and you've got to eat a suda, you've got to eat a meal, and you've got to get drunk, and it's a very, very physical day. Purim is really the chetzi lachem. It's very physical, like the rabbis explain. Mitzvah Hashem, we'll talk about this at greater length tomorrow, but the rabbis explain it's a lot easier to be righteous on Yom Kippur than it is to be righteous on Purim. It's a lot easier to fast and to be righteous and to be pious than it is to be very physical and to be righteous and pious. And that's what we have to work on. That's really part of what the avodah of the month of Adar is, to be able to live within the physical and to appreciate the physical and to enjoy the physical and still to retain our connection with God. That's something which requires a little bit of work, and Mitzvah Hashem will talk about it tomorrow. Okay, we'll stop over here.